welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We're on episode 76, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jay Mudd. And today we are excited to welcome a new guest to the podcast, an old friend of mine from the college days, Joel Ballew, who's in Columbia. And so, Joel, we're so glad you're joining us from Columbia today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a cool thing to be doing, so I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Awesome,
glad you're here,
man. We're
Joel.
just excited to learn from you today. And Jay, you're in Orlando. We were just kind of chatting before we hit record, and you were telling Joel about what you're up to, and he is actively planting a church right now. You guys just had a village party just a few days ago, right? And
yeah,
he's in an area called, yeah, I mean, like literally. How did that go, Jay? I mean, I know it's exciting times to kind of get updates from you on the beginnings of the church.
Yeah. Well, so it went well. We did not have the attendance I probably wanted, but then again, I was shooting for the stars. I wanted hundreds of people out there. So when I say that, every planter gets their bubble burst really quickly when they're like, "Yeah, hundreds of people are going to come," and then, nah, not really. But we did had some great connections. A lot of people asking about the church. A lot of people wanting to know what was happening. Get the $1 million question. Well, where is the church? I want to look at people a lot of times, be like, "You're looking at it. We are the church." But unfortunately, we live in a culture where the church is that destination, that place down the road, that place I can go to on a Sunday or a weekend, and I can sit down and someone can teach me, and then I can walk out. Versus this active lifestyle. So, I'm reminded every day that I live in the world that we live in, that we really truly need more healthy churches to help redefine the church and what it is, and people to see the church for what it's supposed to be and intended to be. So yeah, thanks for asking. Things went well though. We had some good connections. I'm gonna have people. We've been in our home now, our new home, about a week. I'm gonna have some people in my home this Friday. Finally, it's only been a week, but we were anxiously wanting to get people in our home. So we'll have a handful of people in our home this weekend. So we're excited about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know
Yeah.
there's so much that's happening. And then, of course, bringing Joel onto the podcast, we're so glad you took time out of your day to join us. Like I said, I met Joel at Toccoa Falls College back in the day, and we played basketball together. Joel, do you have any memories of that? Of course, I showed up a little bit later in the game in the year, but those are good days.
No, they were until now. I crossed the 40 threshold, and my body hates me every day for playing college sports. But the misery that I suffer now is great. No, those were great memories. To this day, I still can say I was a college basketball, athlete. I played at a competitive level, even though Toccoa was not quite the level that you get to see on television every day, right? So,
right.
I loved it. I literally, to this day, we have a fantasy basketball league with like 15 of those guys, or 10 to 15 of those guys that, over the 4-year span that I was there, are still majorly connected. I still talk to 4 of them on a month-to-month basis. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
I miss it. I loved it.
And I remember that team. There's so many guys, like the few that I've kept up with, and they've kept up with me, just solid, godly men that really love the Lord. And so some of the guys are in Atlanta area, which is where you're from originally, Atlanta.
Yep.
And but just tell us a little bit about you, Joel. I want you to share about a little bit of about you, your family, and then kind of what brought you to Columbia. Like what was God doing years back that brought you to want to leave Georgia and go on mission?
Sure. So yeah, the story is easy, right? The 3 daughters, 15, 13, and 11. They just changed. So I'm not hesitating because I can't remember. I'm hesitating because they just changed. And at Toccoa, we've been married, 18 years now, 17 years. So that's crazy to think about. That's been that long. We've been together 20, so it's 17 years. Dated for 3. I was born and raised in Atlanta. As much as I'm as Southern as they get, I do have a Southern accent, which I can turn on and off. I always joke, especially learning Spanish 4 or 5 years ago now. I literally can turn it on and off whenever I need to. So yeah, I'm a Georgia boy. My wife and I got married there, raised our kids there. I was a college basketball coach leaving college, and realized I can't make $1 an hour for the amount of time I'm working. It wasn't going to work when we had our first daughter. So relocated back to Atlanta and joined the family business, which long story short, I just found out, I did not know this. I'm a fortune following in the steps of my grandfather, and my dad, which is crazy. So, I never thought that would be something I'd be saying in any form of conversation. So, yeah, we kind of moving along the lines. My kids got homeschooled at the end of us leaving, and I owned a business, and a pretty successful one, out and had offices in LA, had offices in Atlanta, and we're expanding into kind of the Northeast, kind of that New York, Chicago kind of feel. We're trying to be those folks. And as during that process, my wife is a missionary kid from Brazil. She, 18, was there. So it was one of the stories, gosh, in early 2000s, they just pumped a ton of kids out with missionaries. So she was going on that destined path. I was going on the business path. That was our storyline. And what ended up happening is we came back to Atlanta and started working. So, and I took over the family company. Matter of fact, bought it from family, which was pretty cool. And in that process, God called us into missions in a really crazy way. I won't bore you guys with a ton of the details, but it was one of those deals that like only he could script it, right? Just like as I look back now, 5 years in, and I look at it and go, I had everything going right. We had our dream home. We had a business that was killing it. I mean, we were growing at like 100% click a year, every year for 3 years in a row. And we were making very good money, very good money. Mm-hmm. And our little church, literally, Josh called the Bridge Church. It was up in northeast suburbs of Atlanta. And they called me in and said, hey, look, we want you to be our missions pastor. I was like, what? Why? Because they took me on one trip to the Dominican Republic and they didn't have to pay me. And I loved going overseas and kind of doing stuff and working mm-hmm. and sharing the gospel, so forth. So, at that point, I couldn't even I couldn't literally share 3 Bible verses off the top of my head. So it was when I was like, what are we talking about here? And over that next, call it 6 months to a year, God just was working in a crazy way. It was wild. Like the steps and the doors is, my big prayer all the time now is Lord, close doors, open doors. And it was one of those, like every door kept opening and every door for business kept shutting. It was wild. Mm-hmm. So really, legitimately, we're not the normal missionaries, but we were on the field from the day we started, like talking about missions, to the day we got to language school was less than 8 months. We were fully funded within 8 months. So it's just, Colombia was not on our radar. It was not something we wanted to do. We just said, hey, Lord, put us in a place where you want us. Hopefully it's South America or Latin America. Keep us away from places that are going to get us in trouble. And, we're going to be in crime-ridden areas, whatever that looks like. Just put us where you want us. Mm-hmm. And we were talking to our missions boss, and he said, hey, there's this little place called Barranquilla, Colombia, which is on the northern coast of Colombia. We didn't even know where it was. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, 5 years later, your father happened to us. This is home now. I love it, minus the fact that I'm sweating profusely talking to you right now because it's about 98 degrees and 100% humidity. So it makes Florida look gentle.
That's awesome. Jay would love that.
Sorry, I had muted myself so I could listen. Josh, we don't need to get into one of our weather conversations. I would hate that. I would hate that profusely. But anyhow, as you're listening, you probably heard some breaking up and some glitching. I'm not sure if that's just the Wi-Fi signal trying to come through, but that is part of the missionary work, and so we want to embrace that. And so we'll do our best to try to see if we can piece together those pieces where it did break up. We didn't want to stop you because again, it's your story. We want to hear your story. Your story is really important. And so I think we can get the most of the gist of what's going on, how you got to where you are today, Joel. And so thanks for sharing your story and how you got to where you are. And so we'll circle back to what you just said about 98 degrees with 100% humidity. I'm sorry. I really, really am. I have a fan on me right now in my home that has AC. So I'm living the hard life, I know. Because I don't like sweating at all.
He likes the cold weather.
Well, Jay,
Joel,
if it makes you feel any better, this is going to be even worse. We don't run air conditioning. We don't have central air. And we have like those, they're called mini splits. They're like the one where the little radiator's outside and the inside. We only run that in the evening. So we sit, and I'm in jeans and usually in a long sleeve shirt all day long. So yeah, buddy, that would be your suffering for Jesus for sure.
That's right.
Well,
that's right.
Yeah. I prefer the cold. I was really built for the Northeast. I enjoyed my time in Boston for that reason. We didn't have AC in Boston either. We had window units, and we only ran them usually at night as well. So, and it got humid at times, but nothing to what you're experiencing. But again,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your story, Joel.
Yeah, and I'll weave stuff back in for you as the internet kind of plays this game, which is welcome to a third world country. I joke we're in the
Right,
second world.
right.
So yeah, I'll weave it back in so you guys know it. But if it makes you feel any better, I'm looking at this beautiful mango tree outside of my house right now. Just dropping mango. So if you see me look out the window, it's because mangoes are physically dropping, and it
That's
sounds like
awesome.
someone's dying outside. So
Oh, okay.
And there's a fruit vendor that randomly comes by and yells at you through the window. Is that right?
mostly always, it's mostly almost 100% of the time, about 90% of the time, it's guys with aguacate, which is avocados. So that's the big street vendor thing here, and a couple of
Oh,
fruit guys as well. So yeah,
nice. That's right down my alley. I love it.
So Joel,
a little
you
cheaper too,
mentioned
by the
that
way.
you mentioned Joel that you had the successful businesses going. Things were going well. You mentioned that some doors began to close on you. God was definitely directing you to where you're at now. But you have found a creative way to intertwine the two, business and mission work. And so I'd love to hear about how you've intertwined those two, how those two work together for you in your current context, and how that's all going there in Colombia. So share with us a little bit.
Yeah, Jay. I think it's one of these things. I get to talk on circuits now. I get to go to like these conferences and share what we're doing, and it's hilarious because I have absolutely nothing to do with it. Right? It is 100% a God thing. What I did in the States from an entrepreneurial perspective has no connection whatsoever to what I'm doing here, other than being a business guy, right? For lack of a better term. So what we've came up with in language school, I was praying hard, right? We saw a need, we saw a void. The local pastor, the local church planner is very good at what they do. They don't need seminary training. They don't, frankly, I may ruffle feathers with some of the things I say, but they frankly don't need me at all, right? They're strong believers. They grind every day. These guys work double what I think they should be working. But the problem is they have very limited resources, right? And when I say resources, I mean they can't afford space. They physically can't afford it, right? Because tithes and offerings don't ever hit the number that they need to be at. And then part two of that is, so not only do they not have a place to meet, they also don't have a salary, so they're bivocational. And there's not exactly something wrong with that, but when they're working as hard as they are, there's no time for family, there's no time for rest, there's no time for anything other than preaching and seeing some folks, doing some small group things on the weekends. But it's just so hard. So we saw those two things being absolute kind of, we call them weckles, holes in the system of church planning. We said, what can we do to come alongside that? And God in language school was really awesome about it. Laid it right on my heart real quick. It was co-working.
Mhm.
And co-working, frankly, is, for those who don't know what that whole concept is, it's basically a large office space where, let's call it 10,000. I got to think in meters and feet. Sorry about that. So I will hesitate. But 10,000 square feet or 15, 20,000 square feet, we take that, break it up into private offices, spaces that are open, or like a literal desk. And then we rent that out to folks, including private, meetings, events, those kind of things. We'll do a myriad of those kind of items as well. So we came up with that idea really as an initial thought process of, we're going to build these things out. We're going to create these spaces really because we knew that these, all these business folks are leaving at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. So we can use it on the weeknights and then we can use it on the weekends because nobody's coming in, right? We'll pull the old Chick-fil-A and close on Sundays and let everybody come in and work, from a church perspective, they can plan on the weekends. Well, it's since evolved as God laid it on my heart to something much bigger and broader than that, as kind of Josh alluded to earlier. But it really was built out of that heart to, okay, let's fill the need for, they can't afford space, but we'll pay for the space and make it self-sustainable. And then part two is, we were going to have them work in our space and then create an opportunity for discipleship, evangelism opportunities for people who walk in the door, and at the same time give them an opportunity to get a paycheck. Well, yeah, now this is version 3.0 and it's taken on a whole mind of its own. But that was the whole reason we started, Jay, is kind of create an opportunity for local church planners. Now, yeah, it's a whole different animal.
That's good. So when you think combining missions with or church planning with business, one thing that I love about how you're thinking is you're thinking differently. You're thinking of, okay, how do we meet people where they're at in our context? And I think it worked across, cross cultures. I really do. But when you guys are looking at a planter, when you're looking at having these spaces that can be used by businesses, how are you seeing churches fostered and maybe even sent out, or didn't you talk to me earlier on about many times they use the space for Sunday gatherings? Is that
Yep.
true, or is that kind of is it a hybrid of that?
100%. So that's kind of version 3.0, guys, is what we've decided is, okay, we can almost incubate new church planners during the year, right? So we have a year-long program that literally takes guys, we filter through, hey, look, are they ready to be church planners? We take them through a process. For that year, we train them in things other than seminary, what seminary would train them in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to train them the ABCs of preaching, but we are going to give them tools, help them manage finances, help them organizationally, how to do better
Yeah.
discipleship and evangelism. So we have that piece. That's kind of the one we call that the church planner incubator. We also have just normal run of the mill Sunday service, right? So literally in our spaces, as we grow, as we've just launched. So as we go into this, literally 6 churches are going to meet in our space Saturday and Sunday. We are going to jam. We're going to be pumping people out all weekend, right? So that's part 2 of the deal is, we've offered this just like a local guy. Let's say, for instance, I have a literal church meeting in my backyard with that mango tree I just joked about on Sundays. We'll take that group of 60, 50 people, put them in a co-working space so that you have air conditioning and the things that Jay needs to be comfortable. So we'll put them in there, and so that's part 2 of the deal. And then part 3 is,
Wow.
I'm so glad you said
sorry,
that, Joel.
I got to take cracks at you.
That's
I
good stuff.
apologize.
No,
Yeah.
that's good.
That's
No,
fine.
this
Wow.
is the pastor pod. This is what we do. This is what we do.
We love each other
Real
well.
and real and transparent.
Yes, that's
Wow.
one of our values. No, that's good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
the flexibility and the creativity, and not having the infrastructure or the finances that, many churches have in the States, right? I mean, even though it's hard to plant churches in the States at times, when you're crossing a culture, you're meeting them in their probably mostly poverty at times, right? I'm sure Colombia has some wealth in certain pockets, but talk about that a little bit. How does not just the culture, but kind of the demographic or the way that people, they live every day. How do they learn these tools that you're teaching them? Whether it's managing finances, it's the business side of the church that actually supports the health of the church. Sometimes
100%.
people say, well, the church isn't a business, right? There's almost that business and church don't go together. I think that there's a lot of wisdom developing a healthy structure so that everything is managed in a healthy way that supports the actual life on life ministry.
100%. Well, and I'll even add to that a little bit, Josh. I think I'll start with this, and it's not what you were asking about, but it's something that we're really passionate about. Is with these co-working spaces, right? There's no cross on the door. There's no, it doesn't represent a church per se, but the reality for us is we can access people that probably would never set foot, statistically speaking, in a church. So we're not only allowing those pastors that plant in our space, they work in our space as well, right? The church planters, all those things are going on. But it's an opportunity to be like, why are you different? Why are you doing this thing on Sunday, right? It creates opportunities through relationship to create discipleship and evangelistic opportunities, is what we always say.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is that thing where it's not just teaching guys, church leaders how to better run a church, right? Because if you don't hit a budget, you're going to close the doors. It is what it is, right? It doesn't matter if we're in
Mm-hmm.
Colombia or we're in the States. It's the same process. If you can't just at least manage simple organizational things, people are going to leave and go somewhere else. It still happens here as well, right?
Sure.
And a lot of what's happening here in Colombia is we have a very small minority of evangelical Christians, and we're basically just poaching each other's congregants, right? The newer, sexier look is where we're going to go because it's cool. And then as soon as we get somebody aggravated, then we're just going to go somewhere else, right? So we're really struggling from that perspective. So I think part of the problem is 73% of people here don't eat 3 meals a day, not because they're intermittent fasting, but because they can't afford to, right? So part of it, as I go back to how a friend does, I'm trying to say the words in English, offerings and tithes, that doesn't play well because a lot of people couldn't afford because they're not eating 3 times a day because they can't.
Mm-hmm.
So we're creating really kind of an ecosystem, for lack of a better term. I don't have a better term, for those folks to be able, okay, that pastor is pouring into this group of people, but they're not going to be able to get what they need to be sustainable in their own lives, and the church building, that tangible thing known as the church. They're not able to support that as well. So we're kind of in this weird world where we have to build something out, because again, this is South America as a whole, outside of big cities. It's just a tough deal. I know of 2 churches today that are self-sustaining, and part of that self-sustaining is they receive tithes and offerings from churches in the United States. And there's over 1,000 churches in our city today. So that's a crazy thought process.
So talk to me again. I think you mentioned a stat. You just kind of alluded to it, but how many people are unreached? And is it Columbia? It might just be your area, but in Columbia that are, when we talk about unreached, we're talking people without faith in Jesus.
Sure. So 7% of the country of Colombia is evangelical, Christian, Protestant, what we would consider, that the normal run-of-the-mill evangelical. The number that I gave you, which I'm close and personal with and have a heart for more than anything, probably, and why God put me in this place, is 71% of the working business class. So, the guys that do what I do on a day-to-day basis, the CEO, the COO, the business elite, kind of the business class, the guys who run businesses, manage businesses day to day, do not know who Jesus is. So, that's a crazy number, and why, it's kind of funny. I just learned this stat, like, we're talking 6 months ago. It's crazy that God put me in a place that I run a business and shake hands with guys who run businesses. Oh, and by the way, I offer a service to them on a day-to-day basis, right? I had no idea this thing. So it's just too cool that, literally, we're talking that they're agnostic in general, right? They're not even Catholic, is what the statistic really represents. It's not just they're not evangelical. No. They're just agnostic in general. Like, not atheistic, because that would be very bad in this culture. But that's a crazy number to think about.
Wow.
As we look at the people that come through my doors every day in a co-working space, that's literally who we're rubbing shoulders with on a day-to-day basis.
Wow. I think so. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm filtering it through my ears of a church planter and I think what you're doing in Colombia is what we'll actually see more and more of being done across the platform of church planting, which is the idea of the church finding ways to be active in the community in this sense. Like, they're adding value to the community, bringing something to the community that doesn't exist, or that is you started off by saying we evaluated, we saw this void or this need. That should really be the mindset of every missionary, every church planter that goes into a community. You're looking for the void, the need, whatever that may be, and you're going, hey, that's where the church can step in. And for you, it was a co-working space. I even think somewhere in the area where I'm at now, it's such an up and coming. I'm my mind is running the whole time you're talking. I get I get notifications all the time. Somebody's looking for event space or somewhere where they can host something, and it doesn't exist because that's not part of the planned environment that are communities that I'm in, and how that could be used. And my mind instantly goes how that could be used also for ministry purposes as well. So what you're doing is something that we really should all be thinking through. Every pastor who's listening, whether you're an established church or a church planter, you should still always be looking. I mean, I think we should always be reevaluating and going, look, let's take a healthy look at our community as it's growing, as it's developing, as it's shaping and taking form, because communities change. Every so often you should look and see, oh, there's changes in our community. There's something new. There's something drastically going on. And as they change, there's going to be these voids that become clear. And as you see that void, pastors, as we see the void, we should be stepping into that void going, hey, how can the church have a voice here? How can the church have a place here? And I love that you said, you made this simple comment of, that on the door doesn't have a cross. It doesn't have anything that, again, we need to be careful not to push that, because the very people that we're trying to reach are the very people that aren't interested in that. That's who we're trying to reach. I was meeting with it, and I'll say this real quick, and then we'll get back to you, Joe. I was meeting with a church planter a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Jay, I need help thinking missionally of how to get people to come to my church services and my Bible studies. And I said, okay. And I said, so who is your target? Who are you trying to reach? He said, the people who are not Christians and don't want to go to church. I said, okay, well, first thing I would tell you is stop inviting them to church and to your Bible study, because there's very people that don't want to go to your church or your Bible study. So you're missing the connection point, that where I need to reach them is not going to be getting them to come to my Bible study or my church service. Where I'm going to reach them is doing something that's going to, interest them. And then through that, pray and ask God to use the conversation, to guide the conversation, to change their heart and morph their heart. And eventually, yes, that invitation can happen, but the initial conversation can't be come to church and come to Bible study if you're targeting people who have no interest in that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you can't do it that way. That's a backwards thinking. But in our mindset, our idea is, let's put a building up, let's put a cross on it, and people will come.
Yep.
But I think that is not the proper way to think. So I commend you on the work you're doing, and I'm excited about it, because it even makes me think. It should challenge every person who's listening to the podcast of, okay, what are the voids in my community? What are the voids, and how can I, as a church, lead my church to step into those voids and meet the community right where it's at?
No, Jay, I'll echo what you said. I love what you just said, because that's exactly what we say. A little bit more harsh than what you just said. You sugarcoated, but we believe that if you can't meet people with relationship first, like if you can't spend time with people in your home, like what you said earlier, right? We were talking, you have a bunch of people come over to the house. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be doing what we're doing. Like, you shouldn't be, because I think relationship for us drives everything. Meaning, you're never going to get an opportunity to disciple. You're never going to get an opportunity to evangelize. There are situations. Never is not the right word. I get it. But in our context, folks are not going to listen to that conversation. And I'll give you an example in a second, but never going to listen if you do not have at least some form of relationship that you can lean on. I have friends in our house that have been here, that hung out with us for years, and just asked me within the last 6 months. We've been here 5 years. Just in the last 6 months, said, "What is this thing? Like, I don't get it. Why are you here? Like, what is this missionary thing?" They don't even know what it is. Well, now it's an opportunity. I say, "Hey, look, this is what we do. We share it because we believe this." And they go, "That's great. Let's talk more about that." And I'm going,
So here's what I find, though, is, Joel, exactly what you just said. Okay, 5 years in, you've been having people in your home. Did I hear you correctly? They've been coming over
"Yeah,
for about 5 years or so. 5 years in, you're just now having that conversation, and some people, and I don't know, I don't. There'll be a group of people who would say, "Well, why hasn't that happened sooner? Why did it take you 5 years to do that? Why would it be 5 years before that conversation can happen?" And I think some people, I think we need to understand that we just need to be patient and listen and be sensitive to the Spirit. The Spirit will draw. Let's remember what the Scripture tells us. Who's the one that draws mankind to God? It's the Spirit that does that. And it took 5 years for that conversation to happen. And who are we to judge the timeline that God puts in place? All right. I'm not judging. I'm not doubting your work ethic and your ability and your desire to reach people. But sometimes it's that long game that we play that many people want to balk at, because it's not happening quick enough, because we have a culture that's instant. Everything's instant. Everything is instant. I'm not sure about Colombia, but I know in the States here, everything is instant. We want it as soon as possible. I don't even want to get out of my car. I don't want to drive somewhere. I'm going to DoorDash it, because that way I can do something else while my food arrives at my door and at my house. It's all instant gratification. And that somehow somebody believes it has to transfer to the church life, which is totally not the case. And so, thank you for not sugarcoating it, because we don't need to sugarcoat it. So thank you.
no, I appreciate that, what you said. And it's true. I think we have to deal with folks all the time who want to either support our ministry or evaluate because they work for organizations, as we work with, that will say a million times over, where are the results? And it's like, great, there are going to be people where we just need to sit down and go, John 3:16, let's do this, right? That's not to say my earlier statement doesn't play. It still works on those one-off moments. Somebody walks up to me and is really hurting. We need to go through this now. Let's share the gospel. And the good news
Right.
that is Jesus dying on the cross. But at the same time, there are others who do not need to be banged over the head with the Bible. They need relationship, and they need some loving, and they need just maybe like somebody come over and just cry on a shoulder one day. We have those relationships. So there are short-term, long-term, and everything in between, right? And so I think I love what you said. I love that. I think I'll go back to the example I was going to give you guys. It's hilarious how many times I've introduced myself as a missionary while I've lived here, and how quickly that conversation ended. The moment I introduce myself as the CEO of a startup that's potentially going to be one of the largest co-working space providers in the continent, as soon as I do that, how much longer that conversation takes place.
Mm-hmm.
It's an automatic. People don't want to get that, especially in our community, right? That's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the reality. And
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. God works in some really cool ways. There's a thing called business as missions because God allowed that to take place, right? And so I'm always like, okay, don't get too Twitter faded. It's okay.
Well,
Well,
it's that
people don't want to
idea
feel
of
like a
you're not a
project.
project, right? Yeah, but I mean, you're showing the gospel and sharing it. You're looking for opportunities whenever they need to see the difference in your life, and a lot of them have not experienced. I think it's true. Like where I'm at, a lot of people have not experienced true life giving relationship with Christians, like true believers. Like they've been to like religious services. They might have grown up going to a church, but they don't have a relationship with God. So when they hear pastor, missionary, go to church, they automatically will categorize many times. Oh, this or that. Like there's, different folks that I'm working on. I'm praying through and I'm building relationships with, and of course they'll find out I'm a pastor, and it always sometimes it's fine, and other times they start acting funny and ask really hilarious questions. Like some questions are amazing, and I love the moments that they ask you the questions that they're not supposed to ask. Like, I guess you don't do XYZ on the weekend, or I guess you don't do blah blah blah. And I actually think those are funnier conversations versus the whole like, oh, that's great. Well, all right, well, I gotta go now, or I hope I didn't say a bad word. But it's being relational and meeting people where they're at. I mean, that is what Jesus did. I mean, Jesus, everywhere he went, he modeled to his disciples that you are to show each person that they're valuable, and that as you show they're valuable, their openness is revealed as you share and you show the love of Christ. And I know that sounds very simple, but I think at the end of the day, love crosses cultures. Like the love of Christ crosses cultural boundaries. And I've seen it on mission trips where I've been. I might not always understand everything they say, or they don't understand everything I say, but when you show true Christian love, it opens the heart to what we have to say or do for them. And I love what you're doing, Joel. It's just encouraging to hear how you and your family, leaving what you knew to say, hey, let's go somewhere, try something different that maybe isn't the traditional missionary route, but you're using your gifts. You're using the way God has gifted you and given you all your abilities to not only use business as a way to provide and also give, but you're using that as a connection point to a huge group of people that don't know Christ.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's funny. As you said that, I literally, when I became a missionary, like we signed the paperwork, right? That's how I say we became a missionary, like official. They made us go
Yeah.
through the question and answer stuff, all the hard stuff that comes with that process. And I literally said that day, I was like, I'll never do business again. I renounce, basically, long story short, I renounce everything. And it is so funny, so comedic how God just 180'd it and slapped me right in the face with exactly what I left. Right. But it's just so cool. And God continues to, as I said earlier, open these doors that, I have access to people now that are, important people that I would never have access to in a million years. So it's just, I get to share the gospel and I get to talk about what I do with people that I, again, never should be running in circles with. Like, and again, very influential people in a country, in a city that it's just so cool. And again,
That's
I was the
awesome.
guy who sat there and said, I'm renouncing all this. So it's fun. It's just fun.
So tell us, I know you work with churches and of course you partner with mission organization that you're part of, but also how can pastors listening or, church members that listen, church leaders that listen to the podcast, how can we pray and or make a bigger difference in Colombia? What are some ways that we can pray to be a partner and support you guys?
Yeah. The hardest question you'll ask, frankly, I think really at the end of the day is not to forget South America, right? I think it's just such an easy thing to do. The 1040 windows we talk about in pastor circles and mission circles, everybody's leaning towards that segment of the world. And what they don't realize is, as I walk out the door, people don't know what a missionary is. Like people don't know what a pastor does, and what is like. They all think that Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, Christians are all rolled in the same bundle. What is that? Wait a minute, they're different. like the stuff that we experience on a day-to-day basis, people just don't wrap their arms around. And I am a 3-hour flight, no, 2 hour and 20-minute flight from Miami. So to get back home to Atlanta is 5.5 hours with layover, without a layover. It's hilarious that there's so many opportunities and people just don't even have a clue, right? Just don't even get it. And by the way, for everybody listening, we are not like what it is on Netflix. I promise. Colombia is a lot safer than you think it is. So as I always joke, Netflix did not do us a service at all. But where I live, I walk around with my cell phone. My wife wears her wedding ring. We live a normal life. It's not like people are chopping off arms and things like that. It doesn't happen. But I think to answer the question easily, it's don't forget about Colombia. Don't forget about South America. But most importantly, there are a ton of things that people do on a day-to-day basis they don't realize are gifts that places like Barranquilla, places like Cartagena to the west of us, Bogota, Medellin, pastors need that. They need those resources. It's not financial. Sure, financial stuff is always great. Financial resources are a great thing that America can provide other places. But I think as pastors and just lay people in churches need to understand is there are so many things that we can do just from a resource perspective that you have just being you as a human being. Just having a Josh Robinson come down and share how he does community building really well in Venice, Florida Beach is important. Like that kind of stuff matters, right? Jay, your experiences in the northern, like up in the north and coming back and transferring, how does that work? And going back and forth and having a big family, that matters. And that's not even like what you do, right? That's just who you are. Those are the kind of things that we can pour into locals and especially local pastors that doesn't cost anything. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. If it's not, if I can hammer home to people, it's not finances, right? We need, as a local church in Colombia and South America, need to figure out how to be self-sustainable. So I think that's, if we can walk away with that understanding, hey, look, it's not just building wells. It's not just sending money down and buying mosquito nets. It's being on the ground and doing relationships with people and supporting them by pouring in what we're really good at to them so they can be better than they were before. Changing family trees is what we always say. Changing family trees and dynamics. Those are the two things we always preach about.
That's good. That's really, really good. So we'll drop as much of that as we can in the show notes down below, maybe a contact information or something along those lines. You can always reach out to us and get that contact information. We may not want to put there in the show notes, but maybe somewhere where they can go check out. Is there something online they can go check out what you do or connect?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we'll drop that in there. Go ahead and say what it is. How can they find online and read more about what you're doing over there and things of that sort?
Yeah, so our website's the easiest place to go, 12degreesnorth.org. That's the easy one. Okay. And what we can do, I think we'll put it in the show notes, but there's, the company website, then our South American mission, who we're with as missionaries. It's a cool place to start as well. So that'll help. But yeah, I think 12 Degrees North is the best place to start.
Okay. Well, we'll drop that in the show notes. And Joel, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Thank you for taking some time out of your day, sweating as much as you need to sweat to be here on the podcast. And it was a joy. I'm now my mind is running and inspired with different things that I can do here in the States, even as far as pushing back the darkness and advancing the gospel. But from Josh and Joel and myself here at the Pastor Pod, we thank you so much for joining us for another edition of the podcast, and hope to see you back next week here on the Pastor Pod. Have a great weekend. See you next week.